Why do superpowers that dominate the world for generations vanish within decades? What pattern connects the Spanish Empire of 1600, the British Empire of 1945, and the Soviet Union of 1991? Three completely different civilizations that all collapsed following the identical sequence. And if this pattern is so consistent, so mathematically predictable, why does every rising power believe they'll be the exception? History has run this experiment 3 times in 5 centuries. Each time, a global superpower reached a peak where their dominance seemed permanent, their currency was universally accepted, and their military reach was unmatched. Each time, they followed 7 specific stages from expansion to implosion. And each time, they collapsed faster than anyone, especially those living through it, thought possible. The Spanish Empire controlled the world's gold and silver for a century before disintegrating into irrelevance within 80 years. The British Empire ruled a quarter of the Earth's surface before losing everything in 40 years. The Soviet Union possessed 30,000 nuclear weapons and vanished in 900 days without a single foreign invasion. If you're watching from anywhere around the world, hit subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear who's exploring these patterns with me. 3 empires, 3 collapses, the same 7-stage sequence every time. Understanding this pattern isn't academic, it's diagnostic. Because the United States has already progressed through 5 of those 7 stages, and the historical precedent suggests what comes next happens quickly, often catching populations completely unprepared. The pattern begins with a critical misunderstanding about what imperial collapse actually means. It doesn't announce itself with military defeat or foreign conquest. It emerges from internal economic contradictions that accumulate gradually until they trigger sudden systemic failure. The empire extends beyond its capacity to sustain itself, militarily, economically, and politically. Resources flow outward faster than they can be generated. Productive capacity declines while consumption increases. The financial mechanisms that once funded expansion become sources of instability. At first, decline is invisible to those inside the system. The currency still functions in daily transactions. The military still wins tactical engagements. Political leaders still make confident proclamations. But beneath this surface normalcy, foundational elements are fracturing. Capital misallocation intensifies. Debt accumulates. Talented individuals begin seeking opportunities elsewhere. Then acceleration begins. Allied nations start hedging their commitments. Rival powers test boundaries that were previously respected. Trading partners develop alternative systems. Reserve currency status, the ultimate advantage of imperial dominance, begins eroding. Suddenly, the very mechanisms that enabled global reach become vulnerabilities. A currency once demanded by every nation for international trade floods back home, triggering inflation. A military presence spanning the globe becomes financially unsustainable. Commitments that were guaranteed by overwhelming strength become impossible to honor. This isn't theoretical speculation. It's precisely what happened to Spain between 1600 and 1680, to Britain between 1918 and 1970, and to the Soviet Union between 1985 and 1991. Each believed their position was permanent. Each extended militarily beyond their economic capacity. Each manipulated their currency when revenues couldn't match expenditures, and each refused to acknowledge reality until collapse was already underway. Spain established the template. After Christopher Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, Spanish conquistadors claimed vast territories containing the richest mineral deposits ever discovered. Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztec Empire in 1521. Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire in 1533. Within 50 years, Spanish galleons were transporting 200 tons of silver annually from mines in Potosí and Zacatecas. By 1600, annual shipments exceeded 400 tons. This influx positioned Spain as the financial center of the 16th century world. The Spanish real became Europe's dominant currency. Every major commercial transaction involved Spanish silver. The Spanish crown under King Philip II, who ruled from 1556 to 1598, commanded wealth that dwarfed any previous European monarchy. Philip deployed this wealth to establish Spanish dominance everywhere simultaneously. His forces fought Ottoman fleets in the Mediterranean, French armies in Italy, Protestant rebels in the Netherlands, and English naval forces in the Atlantic. He sent expeditions to the Philippines and funded military operations across the Americas. By 1580, Spain maintained military commitments across 4 continents. The cost consumed over half of all royal revenue, yet still proved insufficient. When tax revenue couldn't cover expenditures, Philip's treasury resorted to currency manipulation. They began adulterating silver coins by mixing increasing percentages of copper while maintaining the same face value. A coin that should have contained pure silver became 50% copper, then 75%. The nominal value remained unchanged, but the actual metal content plummeted. By 1600, Spanish coins contained so little silver that merchants across Europe began refusing them at face value or demanding higher prices to compensate. Inflation accelerated dramatically. Simultaneously, Spain borrowed continuously from Italian and German banking houses. In 1557, barely 20 years into Philip's reign, the Spanish crown declared bankruptcy. It defaulted on all outstanding loans. They restructured the debt and immediately resumed borrowing. Bankruptcy was declared again in 1575, again in 1596, again in 1607, 4 state bankruptcies within 50 years. Each time, the government promised fiscal reforms. Each time, the pattern resumed within months. The unlimited silver created a more insidious problem than mere inflation. It destroyed Spain's productive economy. When a nation possesses apparently infinite monetary resources, domestic production becomes economically irrational. Why cultivate crops when importing grain is effortless? Why develop manufacturing when purchasing finished goods from abroad requires merely shipping silver? Why innovate when wealth appears to flow automatically from colonial mines? Spanish nobility came to view productive work as beneath their station. Manufacturing declined. Agricultural productivity stagnated. The wealth extracted from American mines flowed immediately back out to purchase French grain, Italian textiles, Dutch ships, and German weapons. Spain functioned as a conduit. Precious metals arrived from the New World and departed immediately to pay for imported goods. Nothing remained to build domestic capacity. By 1600, Spain produced virtually nothing that other nations wanted to purchase. They had become entirely dependent on imports, entirely dependent on colonial silver to finance everything. When mine production began declining in the early 1600s, due to depletion and labor shortages, the entire system collapsed rapidly. Tax revenue fell. The government couldn't meet military payrolls. Soldiers mutinied. Allies abandoned commitments. With economic failure came social disintegration. Crime rates surged in Madrid and other cities. Vagrancy became epidemic. Productive citizens emigrated to France, England, and the Netherlands, nations actively building industries and creating opportunities. Spain was left with a population of bureaucrats, soldiers, and clergy. Few people created wealth. Everyone consumed it. By 1640, Portugal, which had been forcibly incorporated into Spain in 1580, regained independence. By 1648, the Netherlands secured formal recognition of their independence after 80 years of warfare. By 1700, the Spanish Empire remained vast on maps but economically moribund. The transformation from global superpower to secondary European state occurred in less than a century. Spain never recovered that position. 3 centuries later, Britain followed a remarkably similar trajectory despite completely different political and economic systems. At its peak in 1920, the British Empire controlled approximately 13 million square miles, roughly 1/4 of Earth's land surface, governing over 400 million subjects. The pound sterling functioned as the global reserve currency. Every major international contract was denominated in pounds. Central banks worldwide held British government bonds as their primary reserves. London was unquestionably the financial capital of the world. Britain's path to collapse began with World War I. By 1914, Britain maintained military commitments across 6 continents: India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean. When war erupted in Europe, Britain faced an excruciating choice: remain neutral and allow continental powers to determine Europe's future, or intervene militarily and strain the empire's finances to breaking point. They chose intervention. World War I ultimately cost Britain over £40 billion, equivalent to roughly $1 trillion in contemporary dollars. They borrowed from everyone willing to lend, primarily the United States. By 1918, Britain had transformed from the world's largest creditor nation to a massive debtor owing billions to America. They had won the war and preserved the empire, but the financial foundation was shattered. Britain attempted to restore pre-war monetary normalcy by returning to the gold standard in 1925 at the pre-war exchange rate. This decision proved catastrophic. The pound was significantly overvalued relative to Britain's actual economic capacity after the war's devastation. British exports became prohibitively expensive in international markets. Manufacturing declined sharply. Unemployment rose throughout the 1920s. The government maintained high interest rates to defend the currency's value, which further suppressed domestic economic activity. By September 1931, Britain could no longer sustain the pretense. They abandoned the gold standard. The pound's value dropped 25% within weeks. The global reserve currency had publicly admitted it couldn't honor its fundamental commitment to maintain value. Confidence eroded rapidly. Then World War II imposed costs that completely exceeded Britain's capacity to bear. The war consumed over £120 billion. By 1945, Britain owed the United States and Canada more than £30 billion, exceeding Britain's entire annual gross domestic product. The war was won, but the empire was financially finished. They couldn't defend it, couldn't administer it, couldn't justify the expenditure. In 1947, Britain granted independence to India, the crown jewel that had provided wealth, manpower, and strategic position for nearly 2 centuries. Over the subsequent 25 years, virtually every colonial possession gained independence. African territories, Middle Eastern protectorates, Southeast Asian colonies, Caribbean islands, all gone by 1970. The empire that had spanned the globe existed only in historical memory. The pound continued its decline throughout this period. In 1940, £1 equaled $4.03. By 1950, $2.80. By 1970, $2.40. By 1985, $1.30. The global reserve currency had become a regional European currency with declining international relevance. Britain maintained symbolic elements of power, a permanent UN Security Council seat, nuclear weapons, the special relationship with America. But everyone understood the reality. They had transitioned from imperial power to secondary state in less than 50 years. The empire was irretrievably gone. The Soviet Union's collapse followed the identical pattern with even greater speed. After World War II, the USSR emerged as a genuine superpower with nuclear weapons, control over Eastern Europe, the world's largest standing army, and apparent ideological momentum. For 45 years, they competed directly with the United States, matching American military deployments, technological achievements, and global influence. Beneath this impressive surface, however, the economy was systematically failing. The Soviet Union dedicated 15 to 20% of GDP to military expenditures, triple the American percentage. They had to match American technological development, global reach, and alliance networks, despite an economy perhaps one-third the size. They maintained troops in Afghanistan, subsidized Cuba, supported Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, and Ethiopia. Everywhere America exerted influence, Soviet resources countered. The expenditure was fundamentally unsustainable. By the 1970s, Soviet economic growth had essentially ceased. Oil revenues provided temporary relief, but every other sector was declining. Factories produced obsolete equipment. Collective farms required increasing subsidies while producing less. Technology fell decades behind Western standards. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was importing grain from the United States and Canada. A nation controlling some of Earth's most fertile agricultural land couldn't feed its own population. The ruble never functioned as a real international currency. It couldn't be freely exchanged. Even Soviet citizens avoided using rubles when possible, preferring dollars or Deutschmarks for savings. The government purchased foreign goods with gold reserves and oil exports because no one wanted rubles. When oil prices collapsed in 1986, Soviet hard currency earnings plummeted. Gold reserves began depleting rapidly. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Eastern European nations, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, abandoned Soviet control within months. The satellite buffer that had provided strategic depth vanished. The Soviet government couldn't prevent it. They were financially exhausted. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. From the fall of the Berlin Wall to complete dissolution took 900 days. No foreign invasion, no military defeat, pure economic implosion. The government couldn't pay salaries. State functions collapsed. The ruble became worthless. A superpower possessing 30,000 nuclear weapons disintegrated from internal economic failure. 3 empires, 3 collapses. The same sequence every time. And the United States is now deep into that identical pattern. Consider where America stands in 2025. The United States maintains over 750 military installations across 80 countries with some military presence in over 150 nations. Commitments include defending NATO's 30 members, treaty obligations to Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia, ongoing operations in the Middle East, and increasing focus on countering China. The annual military budget exceeds $850 billion, more than the next 10 nations combined, yet military leaders consistently warn of resource constraints, aging equipment, and recruitment shortfalls. Currency debasement proceeds continuously. In 1971, President Nixon ended dollar convertibility to gold. Since then, the Federal Reserve has expanded the money supply by over 400%. Since 2020 alone, more than $5 trillion have been created. The dollar has lost approximately 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. The mechanism differs from Spanish copper-mixed coins, but the fundamental process is identical, expanding monetary supply without corresponding productive capacity growth. Federal debt now exceeds $36 trillion, approximately 120% of GDP. Annual interest payments approach $1 trillion, exceeding defense spending. The government runs deficits exceeding $1 trillion annually, even during economic expansion and peacetime. New borrowing increasingly finances interest on existing debt, the textbook definition of a debt spiral. America's manufacturing base has been systematically dismantled over 4 decades. Production has shifted to China, Mexico, Vietnam, and other nations. The United States now imports approximately $800 billion more than it exports annually. The nation is dependent on foreign supply chains for medicine, electronics, steel, and increasingly even military components. Like Spain watching silver flow out to pay for imports, America watches dollars flow outward while productive capacity diminishes. There's a common assumption that American dominance is fundamentally different from previous empires, that technology or innovation or democratic institutions provide immunity from historical patterns. This is precisely what Spanish courtiers believed about their silver wealth, what British officials believed about their maritime dominance, and what Soviet planners believed about their ideological system. Each empire considered itself exceptional. Each believed the rules didn't apply to them. The historical record suggests otherwise. The remaining stages in the pattern are loss of reserve currency status and rapid systemic collapse. Reserve currency loss occurs when other nations no longer need to hold dollars for international trade, when alternatives become viable, when confidence in long-term value erodes. Early indicators are already visible. BRICS nations developing alternative payment systems, central banks accumulating gold at the highest rates in decades, China and Russia conducting bilateral trade in yuan and rubles, Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil sales. These are preliminary fractures in dollar dominance. The final stage is sudden collapse, not gradual managed decline, but rapid systemic failure. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in under 3 years. Britain lost the empire within 40 years of its peak. Spain took slightly longer, but never recovered. When the reserve currency fails, when debt becomes mathematically impossible to service, when military expenditures can't be funded, the system doesn't decline gracefully. It breaks quickly, often catching populations completely unprepared. The pattern has repeated 3 times across 5 centuries, with different political systems, different economic models, different cultural contexts. The consistency suggests the pattern operates at a level deeper than ideology or government structure. It's mathematical, embedded in the relationship between productive capacity, military expenditure, currency manipulation, and debt accumulation. Each previous empire believed they were exceptional, that their specific circumstances made them immune to historical patterns. They were wrong every time. The United States tells itself the same story now. We have technology, we have the dollar's special position, we're America. But the pattern doesn't respond to exceptionalism. The mathematics of imperial overextension operates regardless of national mythology. Perhaps the United States will find an exit that Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union couldn't. Perhaps this time genuinely is different. Perhaps the pattern can be broken through reform, restructuring, or some unprecedented innovation. But history, which has watched this sequence unfold 3 times with remarkable consistency, suggests otherwise. The mathematics of unsustainable systems eventually assert themselves regardless of intentions or beliefs. If understanding where America sits within this historical pattern changed your perspective, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. The sequence isn't hiding in speculation about the future. It's written clearly in the past, and recognizing the pattern is the first step toward understanding what comes next.